Welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer. I'm the education manager here. Thank you all for spending part of your Saturday afternoon with us. Just a little logistical information. The studios will be open after the artist talk, so feel free to continue any conversations we start today into the hallway and the studios. We will be hearing from two artists today, Dominique, who will be here through the end of this month, August, and Arden, who will be here through the end of February. So make sure to come back and visit them and continue cultivating connections and relationships with them. To stay updated with our upcoming programs, you can follow us on our socials, check our website, or join our newsletter. With that said, I will welcome our first artist, Dominique Muñoz. Dominique is a Guatemalan-American visual artist whose practice spans photography, printmaking, weaving, and installation. Dominique grew up in Fairfax, Virginia, and recently earned his MFA in studio art from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2025. He gained his BFA in photography and film from Virginia Commonwealth University in 2015. Dominique recently was a fellow at the Fine Arts Work Center in Massachusetts and was awarded the 2025 Dennis Russell Fellowship at the Center for Fine Art Photography and has attended residencies at Storm King Art Center, Acre, and Oxbow School of Art as a Leroy Neiman Fellow. His work has been exhibited in numerous galleries, including Candela Books and Gallery, the Greenville Museum of Art in North Carolina, the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., Silver Eye Center for Photography in Pennsylvania, 1415 Gallery in New Mexico, and Lump Gallery in North Carolina. A round of applause for Dominique.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Oh, how do I just hit presenter view?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Hi, everybody. My name's Dominique, and thank you for being here today. Let's jump right in. I want to start off with this image where you may notice my grandmother peeking in from the edge of the frame. I grew up in this condominium at the far end of a neighborhood of identical brick buildings in Falls Church, Virginia. Inside the walls of my home held the lives of multiple generations of my family. Frames hung at odd heights, bold, colorful textiles cloaked our beds, draped over furniture, and spilled from closets. These domestic objects shape how I understand home, not as a fixed place, but as an ongoing act of living, arranging, and meaning-making. My practice is rooted in personal and familial history, in which I explore the entanglements of assimilation, queerness, and cultural survival. Through photography, printmaking, weaving, and colorful installations, I build sets, I cut images, I rearrange patterns, and I use light as both a technical and a historical medium. Much of my recent work draws from blankets and textiles that my family brought from Guatemala during their migration to Washington, D.C. I utilize repetition and excess as strategies for visibility, constructing pattern-dense sets within my images. Questions of seeing are both physical and social, guiding my practice toward understanding how the histories of photography have determined what is rendered visible and what remains hidden. My career as a photographer began with a belief in its documentary power, with the idea that the camera could capture something true and authentic. Growing up, I photographed all parts of my life. In college, I even convinced my boss at the Greek deli where I worked to let me bring my camera and photograph the space during my shifts at work. It's my boss on the left, or on the right, and my register on the left. For 3 years, I documented my coworkers in our shared space during the quiet moments between lunchtime rushes. My boss taught me the Greek concept of philotimo, which is in a sense the binding undercurrent that unites humanity together, giving us feelings of honor, empathy, and respect towards one another. This concept guided how I photographed our time at work with one another and continues to be a philosophy that I embody. Those images set the framework for me becoming the inaugural photographer in residence for Clark Construction in 2016. For over a year and a half, I traveled across the country photographing over 100 of their construction sites. I focused my camera on the tradespeople, the people shaping our nation's landscape through their labor. I formed relationships with various workers as they invited me into their specific tasks on each job site. This is an underground tunnel in Atlanta, or a quarry. I was really interested in also the ways that the workers would build like their break rooms at each space. My favorite memory was when I climbed to the top of the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco with the steel workers as they fastened the last beams to crown out the building. That person in the safety vest up there is me photographing 61 stories in the air. This is where I stood to photograph that last image. Wow. By the way, I'm terrified of heights. And it's terribly windy in San Francisco. This project concluded with my first solo exhibition at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. Documentary photography was a way for me to honor the labor of those individuals and make it visible. But the more I worked as a photographer after this experience, specifically a commercial photographer, the more I realized every photograph is constructed. Every frame is a choice. The camera doesn't capture reality, it stages it. I became interested in the tension between these modes of image making. Documentary photography claims authenticity through its apparent lack of intervention. Stage photography openly constructs and manipulates. But what if those categories aren't opposites? What if every photograph exists somewhere between truth and fiction, documentation and performance? This question brought me to more intimate territory, to my family spaces, our home. If all photographs are constructed, what happens when I embrace that construction? When I build sets, arrange scenes, collaborate with my family to stage moments that feel emotionally true, even if they're visually fabricated. That shift recalled a question I first heard from my grandmother. ¿Qué dice tu corazón? What does your heart say? The first time I heard this phrase, I was sitting with her at her dining room table drinking our morning coffee. Her phone rang and she picked up and greeted my uncle with this phrase, ¿Qué dice tu corazón? That moment stayed with me. It was tender. A question that wasn't just about catching up, but about listening deeply to the desire of one's heart. In many Guatemalan and Mayan communities, the heart is understood as the center of knowledge, of intuition, and emotional truth. This phrase is an invitation not to perform, but to return to what is deeply known. It's a decolonial gesture, a reminder that knowledge doesn't always live in the mind. Sometimes it lives in the body, in pattern, in gestures, in the everyday. That question, ¿Qué dice tu corazón?, guides how I move through the studio and how I understand making as a form of listening. It became the title of my central body of work, which I began in 2023 as my MFA thesis, and has continued to guide my practice. From birth, fabric cradles us, soft, worn, and imbued with care, a second skin that shields us from the world. The blankets in my work are not just objects, but vessels of memory, traversing generations, borders, and homes. As a third-generation Guatemalan American, I'm drawn to Sarah Ahmed's ideas of orientation, from her book Queer Phenomenology, not just as direction, but as a way of relating to the world. Migration disorients the body. My grandmother's move from Guatemala to the U.S. shifted our family's center of gravity. What felt near to them, language, land, ritual, felt distant to me, and vice versa. Ahmed writes that to be oriented is also about turning towards certain objects, those that help us find our way. Familiarity provides us a form of orientation. What objects in our home act as our internal compasses? Which turns me to my childhood blankets. Here in my sculpture homing device, Totem, a 10-foot-tall acrylic tower erupts out of the ground from a pile of black beans mixed with pebbles. The structure is filled with every blanket, tablecloth, placemat, cloth napkin, table runner, and wall textile I've gathered from my family over the years. In Mayan weaving traditions, the act of making cloth is a way of recording knowledge. Each thread holds a rhythm and a pattern, a kind of structural storytelling. In my research into the history of these textiles, I found these illustrations at the University of North Carolina's archives. To the right, you see an illustration of various threading styles used across the region to distinguish specific weavers' communities' fabrics. To the left, you see an example of how they are made and structured, line by line. These weaving practices shifted under the pressures of colonization. During the Spanish conquest, weaving didn't stop. It adapted. New materials were introduced, new symbols appeared. Women kept weaving as a way of holding on to lineage, encoding a sense of cultural identity, even as the world around them transformed. Weaving is also a sacred act deeply tied to Mayan cosmology. The goddess Ixchel, deity of fertility, medicine, and weaving, is often honored during these processes. This was a 45-second long exposure I did with my grandma, and one of the early images I started doing in terms of constructing images with my family. But weaving, too, was changed by industrialization. Globalization brought machine looms and synthetic fibers, making it easier, cheaper, faster to produce cloth. The textiles in my childhood home carry this history, some hand-woven, others machine-made, all carrying the weight of cultural meaning even as their methods of production shifted. These fabrics scattered our beds and surfaces when I was a child, but over time they slowly hid away in closets. Assimilation trickled into our home as it adapted to the aesthetics of a new culture here in the United States. The walls of our home began to conform. In the book Art and Photography, David Campney describes the photo studio as a mixture of stage and confessional, a protected arena in which repressed desires and fantasies are worked through. In my practice, I see this space as a clean slate, one where I can build my own world through photographic tools. For artists such as Fanny Coyote, the studio was a place to explore and make manifest the subjective and cultural overlaps between sexuality, spirituality, and ancestry. Similarly, Paul Sapuya queers the studio by fragmenting and layering bodies, objects, and mirrors. His work reminds me that the studio is not just a site of image production, but of reorientation. With the studio space in mind, I turned to the fabrics from my childhood. These objects are imbued with my grandmother and mother's touch and care, and by illuminating these textiles with light and photography, I sought to conjure their matriarchal spirits. At first, the fabrics served as traditional photographic backdrops, stiff and static behind my body in self-portraits. But they soon became the foundation for new forms of thread. After documenting these textiles in the studio, I printed the images and shredded them into strips. These strips collaged my body, building a type of ancestral armor, as seen here in self-portrait as a peacock. Thread became photographic, images themselves transformed into weavable material. I continued treating these print fragments as thread, using paper weaving techniques and suggesting the weaving processes of traditional textiles. I reworked the original patterns by hand. Then digitally, I transformed these swatches once more, scanning them, altering their motifs through repetition, creating endless variations. These new patterns disrupt the original textiles, reconfiguring them into something new, something queer, unfixed, and full of possibility. A new skin for the home. In my project Performance for Camera's Babies, patterns emerge from the corner, forming a multicolored backdrop that stretches across two walls. Multiple shelves extend outward from the wallpaper, holding new, reconfigured childhood portraits of queer individuals. The portraits are obscured with woven masks made from photographs of the exact clothing worn in those images. Here I considered how clothing outwardly expresses identity and how masks exist on a pendulum of visibility and concealment. These images were sourced from a public open call to the larger queer community. In another project, Fight or Flight, a different pattern takes over, wrapping around a 2-story installation. The various wallpapers I create ground my installation in a sensorial experience. The stretches of pixelation remind me of the animated shows I watched as a child, glitchy, surreal, and full of movement. These colorful repetitions disrupt the neutrality of the gallery walls. Their woven gestures and placement extend the figures into its surroundings, creating environments where the photographs and the space become inseparable. Throughout all these projects, I've been able to explore how these new patterns might operate beyond the specific framework of my family's history. With these gestures of stripping away and rebuilding, I consider how cultural traditions are remixed through migration, colliding heritage with contemporary aesthetics that utilize technology as a method for creating. Within my work, the body takes on multiple roles. They form silhouettes, they become an apparatus. Here in Dancing in the Commons, the bodies find their way to the dance floor to sway their hips and gather. In Juntos, the modern portrait, the bodies come together to build up a new figure. Drawing from scholar and cultural critic Juana Maria Rodriguez's writings on queer gestures, she states, gestures are not just movements of the body, but ways of knowing, ways of remembering, and ways of imagining futures. In this way, gesture becomes a form of communication beyond language, one that is made through movement, placement, and repetition. The gestures in these tableaus extend past the body and seep into their surroundings. When I consider the use of bodies throughout the history of photography, portraiture naturally arises. Portraiture, particularly within the colonial archive, has historically functioned as a mechanism of control, classifying, fixing, and framing subjects through the gaze of empire. In his 2019 New York Times article, When the Camera Was a Weapon of Imperialism and When It Still Is, Teja Cole discusses how photography served colonial power, writing, "The dominant power decided that everything had to be seen and cataloged, a task for which photography was perfectly suited. Under the giant umbrella of colonialism, nothing would be allowed to remain hidden from the imperial authorities." My portraits refuse this way of looking. By obscuring the body with mirrors and visual mirages, I fragment perspectives. The body in my work is not captured, instead it performs and reorients how the camera sees. The poses of each silhouette in my compositions oscillate between rigid masculine studio postures and flamboyant dynamic stances I naturally fell into during childhood. The bodily gestures represented embrace my desires and allow them to be seen for the camera. The patterns from my family's textiles color in the cutout silhouettes of my body, echoing the impressions left behind by these objects. Silhouettes are unique forms in that they both conceal and reveal, through outline, through color. They create visual illusions like our own shadows. A shadow only comes to life by physically blocking light. But how can I make something come to life without dimming its light? I'm not seeking to erase its existence, but to create a literal blind spot, one where the body can no longer be visually subjugated. This blind spot isn't a void, it's a refusal to make someone fully visible on someone else's terms. It's a space of protection, of autonomy. The silhouette becomes a site where presence isn't dependent on recognition. It gestures toward the figure without demanding explanation. While looking through my family's archives, I came across this photograph of myself as a child. I was particularly drawn to my posture, how my hip drops, my upper body twists at just the right angle, one hand bends at the wrist, while the other extends just so. I held the pose, locked eyes with my mother's camera, and flash. This is an example of one of the silhouettes I cut. These in-camera collages begin with an X-Acto knife. I carefully remove the figure, myself, from the print. It's a deletion, a deliberate act to erase markers of identification. In that removal, negative space takes shape. An empty figure emerges. That vacant plane between the print and the background becomes a space for play. Early on in these experiments, I suspended a pair of headphones within this gap. That subtle gesture helped shape the silhouette. The drape of the headphones suggested the presence of a shoulder, making the absence feel embodied. The initial crop to this image concealed the mechanics of its making. By framing it a certain way, I hid how I created the illusion. As a child, I wanted to be a magician, and I held tightly to that saying, a magician never reveals their tricks. But there's also power in choosing when to reveal the trick. Eventually I shifted, to pull back the curtain, to show the frame, the supports, my body. That choice, to reveal or withhold, is part of my performance. By revealing the apparatus, I highlight the constructed nature of a photograph itself. A photographic portrait has never been neutral. It demands interruption, pulling the subject out of daily life, positioning the body, adjusting the light, choosing what falls inside the frame and what is left out. Each decision asserts control over how the subject is seen, understood, and remembered. By exposing the tools of my own image making, the clamps, the mirrors, the metallic C-stands, I insist on a different kind of seeing, one that acknowledges the hand behind the image. To see the image not as a window onto truth, but as a set of gestures, constructed, negotiated, and always shifting. Wanting to be a magician wasn't just about smoke and mirrors. It was about transformation, disappearing, reappearing, becoming something else entirely. There's a quiet queerness in that desire, in the ability to shift forms, to decide when and how you're seen. In most of these images, mirrors, akin to the function of cameras, are positioned behind the hand-cut silhouettes, shifting the viewer's perspective, revealing the textiles draped just beyond the camera's view. Through this slight tilt of mirrors, my images construct visual distortions of the space. When viewers encounter a new pattern within the silhouettes, they see reflections of what exists beyond the camera's gaze. They see the space or objects that exist behind the camera's line of sight. This visual destabilization invites viewers not just to question what they see in these spaces, but how they are seeing. The suspended inkjet prints throughout my photographs cling to the arms of a metallic C-stand with the use of spring clamps, a useful tool in the photo studio for holding backdrops, reflectors, and black cards, all tools usually used to manipulate an image. The spring clamps' rubbery, bold, high-visibility colors call attention to the presence and function. In my photographs, the spring clamps begin to resemble jewelry, their utility paired with ornamentation. I think of them as forms of touch, small gestures that hold, press, and shape the silhouette into place. The external pressures that attempt to contain my form, my way of being. The clamps extend their grasp from the inkjet prints to the backdrops, suspending fabrics that drape with a weighted elegance. Between 2 points of tension, a curve appears in the blankets, a gesture that resists the stiff, straight line and instead bends toward softness. This new way of looking, of removing the curtain, allows the collage to reveal itself. The apparatuses are no longer hidden, they become part of the composition, part of the display, and part of the conversation about how images are made and how power operates within the photographic frame. All these gestures transform my childhood homes into a site of fluidity and reimagination. Through collaboration with my family in these spaces, we arrange blankets and their patterns into mesmerizing layers, queering the domestic space from within. Rather than treating the home as a static, gendered, or orderly, I rework it as a site of performance, a place where gestures, objects, and orientation shift, collide, and open up new possibilities for belonging. Color in my work is not restrained. It spills, clashes, and glows. It becomes a mode of queer world making, a kind of emotional architecture that shapes how space feels abundant, cultural, and full of possibility. The deliberate rearrangement of patterns transcends mere aesthetic choice. It becomes an act of spatial reconfiguration. Patterns become architectural elements that transform rooms into environments resistant to categorization. Bold and vibrant colors consume the space, asserting their profound value. Through all these layers, I play with the tension between flatness and depth. I build images that entice the viewer into a space that doesn't fully exist. The prints, the reflections and mirrors, the repetition of patterns all work to create a tactile pool where the image vibrates between presence and absence, through visibility and concealment, where the photograph doesn't shy away from its own materiality in favor of its illusionary tricks. My grandmother and mother become an active participants in this process. By inviting them into the photographic process, I reverse the typical power dynamic between photographer and subject. Informed by Juana Maria Rodriguez's concept of queer latinidad, where identity emerges in the slippages, the border crossings, the mismatches between language, culture, and identity, I approached the home not as a fixed backdrop for heritage, but as a shifting terrain of diasporic belonging. Just as the blankets from my childhood carried the touch of matriarchal care, my work preserves their labor and love. I bring past and present together, constructing spaces that honor my family history, my queer self, and our ongoing acts of survival and imagination. This embodied language has most recently continued to extend beyond my photographs and into sculptural elements. The body becomes represented not just through form, but through material. Silk entered Guatemalan textiles through colonial trade routes, an imposed material historically associated with the status of European influence. But for me, silk also carries a personal weight. When my mother and brother were children, they couldn't fall asleep unless they were holding or touching silk. My grandmother used to wear a silk nightgown just so my mother could rest against it. Later, she gave my younger brother a silk scarf to hold for that same reason. That gesture of giving silk as comfort, as a pathway into rest and dreaming, has stayed with me. I think of the silk in my work as a kind of threshold, a material that allowed my family to slip into other realms, into spaces where the subconscious could build their own worlds. The use of cyanotype in my work considers the way bodies and objects imprint on one another and shape each other into something new. I'm interested in the ritual aspect of exposing these materials to light, allowing patterns and marks to be seen over time. I translate the rewoven patterns in my work into photo negatives, which I then expose to materials coated with this light-sensitive solution. As you can see here in Boulder Bundle Gift, which is in the hallway. And I drape sometimes the fabrics on these pallets as well. The wooden pallets reference the body and the exchange of goods across borders, serving as a metaphor for personal and cultural navigation. These balancing acts echo the instability of imposed structures, the rigid frameworks individuals are expected to navigate, highlighting the precariousness of these systems. Here, the silk extends itself to grasp onto another pallet, similar to holding one's hand. The silk fabric that drapes are set in motion by an external fan, which allow the material to breathe, to come alive, water-like. Peacock feathers throughout my work serve as a symbol of beauty and masculinity, while referencing a journey navigating traditional expectations. Since graduating, I've been developing my practice through various residencies and fellowships around the country. Before coming here to Houston, I spent 7 months in Provincetown as a fellow with the Fine Arts Work Center. And that length of time and support allowed me to create and experiment and learn from other artists. It's actually where I learned basket weaving. Here's my solo show with them, a lot of my explorations of cyanotype. Some more silk cyanotype work. I love a fan. This is my first basket I wove, incorporating those same patterns by sun printing them onto thrifted bed sheets, and is what my practice has been like here, my time in Houston. This is a sketch I made that I finished here as well. It's just called Untitled Sketch. I'm just going to quickly go through these last ones. This is one that I just finished. In all my work, there's an undercurrent of joy of excess, a refusal to be contained, a way of being in the world that honors both where I come from and events where I might still go. I want to share this passage from Rodriguez that names this feeling better than I ever could. In her book, Sexual Futures, Queer Gestures, and Other Latina Longings, Rodriguez writes, "As Latinas and as queers, we are often represented, if not identified, by our seemingly over-the-top gestures, our bodies betraying or gleefully luxuriating in our intentions to exceed the norms of proper corporal containment. Our bodies dispatch sweeping flourishes or hold back wilted wrists. We swish too much. We speak too loudly. The sense we exude disturb the numbing monotony of straight middle-class whiteness. We point with our lips, flirt with our eyes, and shimmy our shoulders to mark our delight. Our racialized excess is already read as queer, outside norms of what is useful or productive. Is that much color, spice, pattern, noise ever truly necessary? Forever tacky, the viscosity of our excess grates across the surfaces we touch." Her articulation of racialized excess resonates deeply with me. Through vibrant colors, layered patterns, and performative embodiment, I reject the sterile minimalism that often dominates modern art spaces. These aesthetic choices are not just merely decorative, but politically charged. They assert the value of cultural expressions that have been dismissed as tacky or excessive. My work celebrates the vibrancy of my culture and my being. Throughout my images, the home becomes not a static repository of tradition, nor a showcase for the contemporary, but a living threshold where my family's blanket patterns speak to present-day questions of belonging. I often think about the small gestures that sustain us. In this photograph, my hand extends into the frame, holding the base of a glass bowl filled with fake fruit. The fruit pretends to be alive, and yet I offer its abundance. Still, the gesture of care is real. Even the stage and the made-up can carry emotional weight, memory, and endless possibilities. As an artist, I examine how histories of care and migration shape identity, ultimately questioning how we continue to make home in ever-changing landscapes. Thank you. All right, time for 2 questions, because I went a little long, sorry. But people could also come and visit me in the studio afterwards as well. But if anyone has any questions.
How did you get involved with the construction company for the photography? That doesn't sound like a typical thing that a construction company would
Yeah, it was a, they just started that program when I applied to it, but the president of the company was really interested in truly finding someone to document the art of building. And it's still a program they continue, so they've now are their maybe 7th photographer. But they reached out to my school, and my thesis advisor recommended me, so they emailed me and were like, you should apply to this. And they liked my work with the deli, showing that I was documenting and photographing people in their workplace. And so I applied basically with that portfolio, nothing to do with construction, but with people and in the workplace, and it's something that resonated with them, and so they let me have total freedom over taking that idea, photograph the art of building. That was just my task, and they were like, run with it however you want, and I would email project managers and different various people around the country at their job sites, and then arrange travels to go meet them. And I even got OSHA 20 certified so that I understood and could be on job sites safely. Yeah.
Did you ever run into foremen and stuff that were like, what are you doing?
Oh, always. But then they also really wanted to show me things too. They'd be on each job site, everyone had their own different tasks and their different teams. So they'd be like, oh, come hang out with us. And they would put me in the forklift. And then as they're putting the windows on, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. Some of this stuff was can we all be on here together? And they're like, it's fine, it's fine. So I learned a lot about construction. One last question. Yeah.
To me, this seems like it's a tremendous amount of emotional dedication, and so it seems really vulnerable. And to me, it's really impressive that you did it with your family. And I sort of a personal question. I sort of wonder, what is your family's relationship with your queerness or your identity, and how was that faced during the process of collaborating with them, and how did that shape how you have framed them in these words?
Yeah. I think it took some time for my family to be comfortable talking about my own queerness and being that having that kind of conversation. So that was, I think, before this project really took shape. And there was definitely a time between my undergrad and my graduate school where it's 8 years of difference. So I think during that time we were able to build our own relationship before I started inviting them into my work. And my work used to be very much external and looking outward and never really internal. And so it gave me the space to do that with them. And it really just started off in conversations with sharing these textiles, sharing these blankets. And I think as we weren't necessarily having conversations where around queerness, and they were just kind of moves and gestures that I was doing, and I was still trying to understand why I was doing this, but I just knew I needed to make. And then after the project, I would talk to my mom, look at this, the photo of me. She's like, why are you using these childhood photos? And I was like, because that feels a little flamboyant pose. And she was like, I guess, but you're just like that as a kid. So she never identified that as queerness, or never wanted to put a label to it, which I respect. That's we don't need to label everything as like this or that, but you could see that there was like a celebration of like whatever, like my happiness there, and we both came to that understanding. And maybe it wasn't through like having the same markers of identification, but it was just like, hey, that is joy, and we both could like come to that. So those, and then like, I mean, my mom hates it when I use the word queer, because like in her time that was like not a thing. That was like, it's like offensive, and so like I get that, and for like our times now, queerness is like a reclamation, and so even her today and I will have these back and forth. She's like, why are you putting that in your artist description? Like, that feels offensive, and I'm like, yeah. But thank you, everyone.
What a gift. Contact stuff. You went past that.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dominique.
Thank you.
All right. Next, I will welcome our next artist, Arden Carlson. Arden Carlson is a Kentucky-born sculptor and woodworker whose practice draws from the vernacular of craft, furniture, and surrealist object making. Arden received a BFA from Murray State University and an MFA from the University of Arkansas. Arden has participated in residencies and programs at the Eureka Springs School of the Arts, Wozniak Artist Residency, and the Museum for Art in Wood, and has a forthcoming residency at Anderson Ranch Arts Center. Not Arden. Arden's work has been exhibited nationally in Los Angeles, Seattle, New York, Arkansas, and Philadelphia. Give a warm welcome to Arden.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Here we are. It's been such a pleasure and a treat to work next door to Dominique, and just to see the way that he interacts with material and the tenderness towards story. And so that's just been a really wonderful part of my residency, and I wanted to start with that. So I'm here for 9 months until the end of February. 2 months in, and like Jen said, I grew up in rural Kentucky. I have a terminal degree in art, but I really feel like my creative education started in the woods and the riverways of Kentucky. Yeah, my father knew a lot about wood grain and material because he built houses, and then my mom was a storyteller. She grew up with 9 other siblings. And they never really taught me those things, but I just kind of caught on over time. If someone asked me what I made work about, I would say it's about the exercise of life and attention, and the maintenance of one's spirit. My work is influenced by simple things like desire, the solitude, and spirituality. I'm not really interested yet in a smaller frame of reference in that, because I'm very much at the beginning of my practice. I used to work quite representationally, but my current choice to work in the abstract is due to the nature of depicting sensation. I think that abstraction is like a very sensitive way to explore themes which are shapeless or only felt. Because to really look at an abstract form, you first have to believe that something is there. Like many artists, I've had an abundance of roles, side quests, ways to make money. I've delivered mail on foot. I've farmed. I've worked for other artists. I've worked on houses, and right now I teach, but other than that, I've also lived in the northwest, east, and south of the U.S. So it's experiences like these that have really shifted my material attention. 3 to 4 years ago, I began centrally working in wood. tree fork chair. This is a work I made last year. It's a variation of a stick chair, a vernacular form of furniture made by farmers and the like, because it's essentially what it is. It's a pile of sticks and faces. The backrest here is a wishbone carved by a tree fork I found on the Delaware River during my residency in Philadelphia last year. To me, this chair positions what it means to rest with desire. It reminds me a lot of when I was a kid, sitting over at neighboring farms, looking out into the hills and talking to farmers about what happened with the crops or what they wish had happened. Someone who's pretty influential to me is painter Agnes Martin, who writes a lot about how inspiration comes from awareness. I returned to the feeling of her work for years, especially how her constant attendance to the canvas resulted in these rhythmic cycles. The final feeling of her works, it just exudes this deep silence. And for a work to arrive so full, but in this simultaneous silence, is everything to me. I often remind myself that if I wanted my work to talk aloud, I would have been a poet. But for me, I just have a very strong feeling about wood carving. I think it requires this constant active tuning. And in one way or another, it also feels like an act of doing something wrong, because when you're working with wood, you have to rive it, you have to split and gnaw away at the material. And this material took decades to become, and its integrity has existed across Earth's life cycle. When working in stone, Noguchi called this a cosmic fracture, this material disruption. So for me, the potency of the material itself, the way that it's a record, a time and event, it really touches upon the strenuous and slow process of everyday life and becoming. And it's for this reason that I keep returning to wood, because it forces you to be quite present with history and an imaginative form. This is a work in progress. It's in my studio right now, down the hallway. But I have been here in residency for 2 months so far, and it's often that people visit my workspace and they're quite struck by the material itself. They ask questions like, "Sir, where did you get this wood?" Or, "Sir, are you sure this isn't all ceramic?" Because like my forms, they have a soft nature to them. And so it's greatly interesting to me how the predestined use of wood, like for houses, furniture, bowls, spoons, and chairs, the functional, it really informs the way that folks come to wooden works. And that this is one of the reasons, in part, that I'm interested in existing right in between the spaces of design, art, and craft. I think that questioning is quite good. In the beginning of the talk, I said that my dad built houses, but I remember as a kid, we'd ride our fishing boat up and down the Kentucky Lake, which is one of the largest man-made lakes in the country. And my dad would point his finger along the shorelines to the staircases that he built that often trailed up these 100-foot embankments. And then later on in life, he would point to the additions that he added onto the houses on the shorelines, and then later the houses that he designed and built. And as a kid, this is the first time that I really came to architecture, is the way that I understood wood, between that and the forest that I grew up around in Kentucky. And then I remember being 21 in undergraduate art history class at a school where I was pursuing psychology. In my dismay at the first time I learned of Kurt Schwitter's, his work Meersbau in Germany. To me, it's a complete and sharp interrogation of the use of wood, but it really frazzled me to see this twisted material. That's a reconstruction done, I think, in the 80s. But then, later on, learning of Wharton Eschrick, who deeply softened the lines of architecture with very organic shapes, almost inherently offering a softness to anyone passing through. So this term, these works, reviewing them, they bring to me the idea of a retinue, and a retinue refers to the group of people that accompany someone in mentorship. It's an old French word that quite literally means that which is retained. I think that every artist has a retinue. Mine includes a lot of builders and farmers, storytellers, musicians, and friends. So these are some other works that I feel deeply influenced by right now. This is Martin Parier. It's a very large sculpture. William Edmondson out of Nashville. He sculpted these works out of limestone once he retired after living his life as a custodian. Olin Bryant, also out of Tennessee. Painter Agnes Pelton, quintessential spiritual painter. And my favorite album of art all time, Joan Armatrading. So there's an old Latin phrase said a lot in text about craft, homo faber. It's usually translated as man the maker. Essentially, it proposes that human beings shape the world through tools, and then the tools turn around and they shape us. A number 5 jack plane, which is used to straighten and flatten boards, or recipes, or language. These are tools that are invented to make living easier and better, allow us to connect. To me, the interesting question here is not the evolution of the tools, really, but rather what the tool is allowing one to be. And I think asking this is good, especially as we continue to progress so quickly through such inventions. But I came to Houston early June with 2 suitcases, both of which carrying the hand tools I need for the residency. And I decided early on to only work within the confinements of my studio instead of enrolling at a traditional wood shop. Along some machines on loan, I bought a lathe and a few other necessary tools, like a drawl knife or block planes. But I really like how this humble parameter asked me to work, and I'm excited to see what the rest of these 7 months are going to look like. But I think a lot about what my practice would have looked like had I been traditionally taught in wood, both in consideration of former method. I was actually a very bad student in my only 2 woodshop classes, and I think I cut every corner possible. I do feel like I'm a bit in a better spot now because I think a lot about conversations such as the decision of using electric tools versus hand tools. My answers used to be based on some hierarchy that using the hand was greater than the machine, but now I don't really care. It's much more about maintaining the blades or maintaining my back the longest as possible. But one reason I do adamantly return to a good collection of carving gouges is due to the gestures that they require. When carving, the muscles in the body, they lock and release. In the body and breath, they work in tandem. And I think this sort of repetitive and enduring motion induces a good contemplative state, facilitating space for one to go inwards, to be radically quiet. By this standard, I think that a form is done when it holds what it means to have sat with oneself. And 2, if it also retains some amount of levity and truth. Okay, I'm wrapping it up now. So for the remainder of the 7 months here I have left in residency, I will be finishing the surfacing on the body of works that are currently in my studio. Those will go up in a solo show in October. And then I'll continue with a series of abstract bas-relief panels studying astronomical rhythms. So, and then, like Jen said, after this residency, I'll go to the Anderson Ranch next to be the Furniture Design Fellow in wood. I wanted But before I go, I want to give a big thank you to the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft and all the staff for the support, and to the Houston Woodworkers Club, who has supported me a lot while I've been here, and also to Dominique, who took a lot of these photos and helped me carry this large slab of wood all over the place the last few months. If anybody has any questions,
Can y'all talk about the land?
come up here.
Arden. Well, so I guess Arden and I, earlier on in our residency, we were like, we want to collaborate on something. And we were just like, it'd be really fun. And as we were working through our studio, we were looking at the shapes that both of us had been making. And Arden was actually making some lampshades. And Arden introduced me to basket reeds, which I started incorporating my practice through them. And literally, what was it, Tuesday or Wednesday?
If even.
This week we were like, should we do our lamp? So we made a lamp this week for our talk.
Yeah. Like, we both thrive a lot on deadlines. But I made the base and the lighting, and then Tom made the lampshade itself.
So it's basket reeds of dyed with cyanotype, exposed with some of the patterns from my childhood blankets, and then a cyanotype fabric on the inside to help dim it a little bit. The rocks.
Yeah, these rocks are from the garden out front too.
So we felt like it was like a nice marking of our practice, and we've always wanted a window between our studio, just to communicate. And now I kind of feel like this is our little window. I don't know, it just feels like we're allowing light in between both of our spaces.
Yeah, it's sweet.
What are your favorite woods to work with, to do with carving?
I'm still learning a lot. Right now I'm working with mahogany, and I'm very pleased by that because the way that the steel of the gouge burnishes the surface is really fascinating. Hey.
I was wondering how your spirituality began and was cultivated, and how it started intersecting with a practice of making, or maybe the practice of making came first, then became a spiritual practice.
I think there's definitely been a seed within me since the beginning, because I grew up in a very radically quiet space, and so that allowed a lot of time to go inwards. And I think spirituality has always been innate.
Alright, I think that's all. Just thank you all again. Thank you to Arden. Like we said earlier, if you would like to continue any conversation or like to visit this artist's studios, the studios will be open till 5 today. Visit Dominique. Like I said, he'll be gone by the end of the month. But Arden will still be with us for another 7 months, and will also be leading a Hands-on Houston in a couple of months. So check out our socials, our website, our newsletter for all of that. Thank you all, and have a nice afternoon.